Hi, Chris. For those of you who don't know Chris, Chris is one of the most fascinating thought leaders today in tech B2B, with thousands of listeners to his State of Demand Gen podcast.
Love the podcast.
Love your
Thank
stuff,
you.
man.
Yeah.
Chris is also the CEO and founder of Refine Labs, right? A demand accelerator with a radical approach to SaaS B2B marketing. Hi, Chris. How are you, man?
I'm really excited to be on the show. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for waking up
yeah,
early.
Things are great.
For us.
It's 12:30 in the afternoon over here.
Oh, okay. No, we're used to seeing darkness outside your window.
Oh.
So
It looks so much sexy in nighttime. But everything does, isn't it?
So look, the way we usually start is, we just have sort of a quick fire round of questions where we ask you for, your favorite tech brand, for example. There's none.
I'm not. Like if you force me to go on, honestly, the one that's top of mind right now is Gong.
Okay.
And I'm not a Gong user, but I just think that they're marketing well and have a good strategy, and their customers are happy. And so, I think they're doing a lot of progressive things that a lot of other B2B marketers might be scared of. I think they're doing some good stuff. If I had more time to look deeply, I might have a couple other ones that people might not. I think a lot of people know Gong. I might have other ones, but that's what I got off the top of my head.
Okay.
All right, great. What marketing tool do you like the best?
I know you're not into tools that much.
Yeah.
But still.
Not into a lot of tools. If you give me Salesforce with a basic marketing automation setup, that's great. Been leading in pretty deeply to both Clearbit and metadata. Those are the ones that I would call out right now. We do spend millions of dollars a month on Facebook and Instagram, and the only way that you can spend millions of dollars a month on Facebook and Instagram in B2B for most B2B companies is to use a tool to target better, and so both those tools help us get there. So it's probably the one that we go to the most. And then I think a lot of the other stuff for people to think about is like, you don't need a lot of stuff to do marketing. Zoom subscription for $40 a month to record this podcast, a little webcam, Anchor to post your podcast for free, LinkedIn to post your podcast to post your content for free, YouTube to post your content for free. When it comes down to it right now, it's not about the tools, it's about the strategy and the talent and the mindset. And that's the way that I look at it right now, because content is at the front. And I think a lot of companies, because of how they've structured their marketing team or how they think about marketing, don't set their marketing team or their company up to be successful in a content first world.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's definitely not conventional wisdom. So it's something we will dive deeper into. Now, this is a corner which we like personally. You have to tell us about one awesome win, one that goes into the history books, something that comes to mind and created significant impact for yourself or a customer.
I mean, I'll give you two. One of them is just I started this company by myself with almost no money like 2 years ago, and have been able to collect some of the best talented people that I know in B2B demand gen. So that has been just like very fulfilling. I look forward to continuing to build the best team that I can. And then a lot of the success that we have is driven through the success of our customers. And so some of the customers that we've been working with now have been with us for more than a year, and we've been able to look back on annual changes in their business from the year before they started working with us to the year that they started working with us, which included COVID. Mm-hmm. And so some major increases for companies that were in Series C, D stages in terms of qualified pipeline. One had qualified pipeline from marketing sourced increased by 309% year over year, and they hired us on the first day of their new fiscal. And so we're definitely not going to take all the credit. The company did a lot of awesome stuff, right? But we help in that process, and so that's something that I'm really excited about.
All right, great. Now tell us about one glorious failure, and what did it teach you, maybe?
Ideally.
I mean, I don't have I'm lucky to not have a lot of glorious failures, but one that taught me something interesting that I think people can learn from is I've been starting little companies for a while now. And so I had an e-commerce company in 2015. I lived in California at the time. And it was just me. I built it in my bedroom to 300K in like 6 months, 300K in revenue. And I was young and did not know how to manage cash flow. And so I started to take money that was the profits of the company and buy a car and go to fancy dinners and do stuff like that. And then I needed to go make $100,000 inventory buy to keep scaling the company, and couldn't make the inventory buy, and the company failed. And so I learned a really, you know what I mean, micro failure, right? Small company, I didn't lose anything. The company just didn't grow. But I learned a valuable lesson that I use now, which is that we take $0 out of this business and it continues to grow, right? And just feed the business.
Okay.
All right. Great.
Okay. So over to, I guess, you know, the core section of the podcast where we want to ask you questions about things that you usually talk about and write about. So, you know, first thing is, you know, all about, you know, how you think attribution is broken. So obviously, you know, everybody's trying to figure out, you know, attribution and using all kinds of fancy tools, which, you know, we know will never give you the full picture anyway. But you are very vocal about how broken attribution is and how it actually leads you in the wrong direction. So do you care to elaborate about that?
Yeah, first, just so everyone, all the CMOs and marketing leaders and everyone, just so they know, like, we use attribution software with every account that we work on, right? So let's just lay that on the table. Like, I talk about the things about attribution because the way that I see it used in companies and how it guides decisions to be misguided and give you the wrong, if you don't know how to interpret the data, you make the wrong decisions about what to do next. And that's what I'm vocal about, because companies obsess over attribution at executives that are outside of the CMO. CFO says, I want to see this, you know, linked UTM data in order for you to post on LinkedIn every day. Otherwise you should go do something else.
Yeah.
And I'm over here and I'm like, we've closed, I don't know, $4 million of net new ARR this year so far. We market on LinkedIn and a podcast, and 90% of our revenue gets attributed to organic search in HubSpot Enterprise. and with their multi-touch attribution tool. And that's what you're going to get when you do marketing like us. And therefore, a lot of companies don't market like us. And I just said we're 25 people. We did 4 million net new ARR so far this year. Like, we're growing fast. But no company's attribution model incentivizes them to do things like this. Because you can't measure a podcast. And so what happens is, if you did a podcast, like just what happens with us, you do a podcast, you do LinkedIn very well, you build up a great audience there. Eventually that audience needs to funnel into a conversion, and they'll funnel into a conversion, AKA Google, and you'll give credit to either SEO or branded paid keywords. And then you'll say, okay, let's just, you know, forget this podcast. Let's spend way more money on paid search, which is what companies do. I watch companies waste hundreds of thousands of dollars a month on Google search, chasing metrics that don't even help the business. And so that's where attribution goes. It goes wrong in two places. It helps you make the wrong decisions if you don't know how to interpret the data, and it prevents your marketers from doing things that work the best, that are difficult to measure, aka building a brand.
But how do you still, you know, firsthand, you know, that it works, but how do you still sort of, you know, make that connection between, you know, all the brand efforts that you go through and how that translates into net new ARR for refinance?
There's a lot of different layers, right? So on a micro layer, I look at the channel metrics. And channel metrics, sometimes qualitative metrics, show you the best story, not quantitative. And so on our LinkedIn, you know, I knew it was going to work when I was getting 10 likes on my post, because 4 out of the 10 were CMOs at companies that we wanted to work with.
Yeah.
And they were commenting on the post saying, hey, this is really great advice. We're struggling with that. If you're looking in your attribution software, you're not going to see that type of data. You're not going to get the insight. You'll never get to where we are right now. So micro level on the podcast, the exact same thing. Like, people sending you DMs, saying really nice things about you online, sharing the stuff, saying how much it helped them when they tried what you said and it helped them be more successful. Like those types of things are what I'm looking for at the channel level at the beginning. As long as they're the right people and the message resonates and you have a good product, you're going after attention at this stage of people that might be interested in buying your product or telling other people that could buy your product. And so that's what I'm looking for at the channel level. The next layer is the growth of inbound volume over time. And so companies, while they think that they're doing a ton of different experiments, they're really not. Like the system is relatively stable, just everyone is busy keeping that system running. And so if you introduce one new layer over a period of time and you can monitor the growth of the inbound channel, maybe you don't need attribution. Maybe you just keep the system. That's what when we run growth experiments, that's what we do. We keep the system stable. We add new one thing. We measure how much it moved the needle. If it moved the needle, then we keep figuring out how to operationalize it so it works better. And then we go and figure out a new experiment. We keep building on it. So a lot of companies don't think about it like that as one way that you can just look at it as inbound volume or inbound pipeline or inbound revenue, depending on your sales cycle. The next one is if you use Gong, if you have a sales team that can provide good feedback, a lot of people on sales calls will tell you what's going on. I knew this I knew Facebook ads were working for our company and the company where I was working for in 2015 because our sales reps would send me emails with quotes from people when they were field sales reps going into meetings. And the person was like, I keep seeing your content on Facebook. It's so good.
Right.
Like, when they're at a sales meeting from an inbound demo request and they say that to your sales rep and your sales rep feeds that back, like probably a indicator that you're doing pretty good marketing. You should keep doing it. Although it won't show up invisible when you measure it. And so those are some of the ways. And then there's a lot of other like nuanced things that I'm not going to get into a lot of detail here unless we end up there. But I think the qualitative measurement is the one that's missing the most in B2B when you go to make a brand move, not a lead gen conversion move. And all B2B marketers are just incentivized and trained to be in lead gen mode all the time.
Yeah, the main challenge is always how you sell it to the CEO, right? Because a lot of the CEOs understand like, show me the quantitative stuff, show me the ROI on what we did. What's your advice for CMOs on how to sell the qualitative measures, especially to the CEO?
What I like to do here is before Mr. and Mrs. CEO, and I've done this for 5 years in my career, both as an employee and now with a lot of different companies. Hey, Mr. or Mrs. CEO, CFO, before we start talking about whether or not a podcast is going to work, why don't we spend time looking at what we're doing right now and quantify whether or not it's working? And so what we should do is when we go and spend $2 million on the conferences that you love going to because you've been doing them for the past 15 years, let's figure out how much it's costing us and the ROI of that. I know that you think that we need 10,000 leads from content syndication every month or every year, and we're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars each month to do that. Let's quantify what the ROI is of that and how much time SDR spend following up with leads that don't buy.
Right.
Let's look at, you're pumped to spend $100,000 a month on Google ads because a bunch of people download our ebook, but let's look at how many people became a customer. It's not a lot of people. Same thing with LinkedIn. I know I interact with quite a few Israeli tech companies, and like they love the heavy spend on Google and LinkedIn to drive mid-funnel content downloads that don't close, to get a lot of cheap leads that don't close. And so let's look at all of the different expenses in marketing right now and figure out if there's a good ROI on anything that we're doing. And then once we level set on what we're doing right now, here's what's working, here's what's not working, maybe it gives us a little bit more confidence to go try something different. So that's the way that I do it.
That's actually a good advice. A lot of the CEOs, though, that we work with, at least, are somewhat new to that. And sometimes it's a new startup. It's, they just hired the CMO. It's an A round or something. And a lot of the CEOs that at least we meet is, from day one, they come with this, I want to see the ROI. I want every dollar that I spend, I want to see the return. So you can show them what they're doing is not really working because they're really not doing anything. It's the first thing that they are doing in marketing. So how do you go about that? It's more tricky, I guess.
Well, for me personally, I try not to work with those people or those companies, right? Like just having historical data and having a company that has a mature executive team past maybe a B round is important because they've scraped their knees and they understand that getting a marketing engine to work is not hiring an agency and waving a magic wand. There's a lot of things that need to go into it. A lot of people would argue that it's actually more difficult than scaling your sales team. I would argue that.
Yeah.
And so when we think about the ROI of marketing, I like to look at it in two separate ways for people. And so there's two separate things to think about. One, you're capturing demand of people that are already looking to buy what you sell, right? And so you're going to be lower funnel right there. You can measure that at direct ROI. You should be able to.
Yeah.
And so there's one. And then if you're going out and creating demand, AKA getting people that are not in a buying cycle aware of your brand, moving them closer to buying. And when they move closer to buying, they're going to buy you. They're going to look for you, not the category of what you sell, and therefore get 4 RFPs with other vendors. They're just going to come and buy your stuff. You need different thoughts on your expectations and time out of that. And by the way, all the upside is on creating demand. And it takes a little bit longer. And so 10 years ago, executives, whether it's, board, VC, executives, marketers have been trained that marketing should happen fast because they collect a lot of leads that don't buy. And when you are marketing to create people that buy, what you're actually doing is moving somebody through a sales cycle without a sales rep. And so it takes longer. If you have a 90-day sales cycle and you're going to get that person when they're 80% of the way done instead of 0% of the way done, maybe it'll take you 75 days for that lead to surface. Maybe it'll even take longer because you lose a lot of those deals because there's not actually a pain point those people want to solve.
Yeah, there's no
intent. And so people need to reframe their mind on time when it comes to marketing in some of the ways that I talk about. And that's just the way that I like to look at it. But if we're going to have the ROI conversation in an early stage company, the ROI conversation in an early stage company gets rooted on the comparison against other ways to get revenue. And so let's compare it against our 12-person SDR team. I know that we're spending $1 million a year on that.
Yeah.
And we're going to spend $1 million over here on marketing for our Series A company. And I know, we just talked about attribution is cloudy. Like, pick your rules, like make it smart. There's plenty of data out there based on your sales cycle about how to make attribution for SMB, mid-market, and enterprise deals. And then just quantify the difference. Not only look at revenue generated, but look at sales cycle length, look at win rates, look at average deal size, look at customer acquisition cost, look at CAC payback based on deal to normalize for deal size. And then you have your outbound channel gives you a benchmark for what marketing should deliver, and marketing should be better than your outbound channel from a cost efficiency standpoint. And that's the way that I like to look at it.
It's great, but I guess going back to the awareness channel. So obviously qualitative is important, but do you have any quantitative metrics that you look at, in terms of creating demand?
So in my lens, we'll talk about it from my lens, and then for SaaS companies. And so from my lens, I don't need it. Right? You know what I mean? Like, all I need to do is I need to listen. I just need to listen to the qualitative. The qualitative grows. So, right, like there's a quantitative metric for how much qualitative data you're getting. Instead of getting one message a week about, hey, your podcast helped me, now it's like 20 messages a week. There's a quantitative impact for you. We watch our podcast audience growth grow, and it maps directly to our revenue growth. So that one helps too. And so there's I personally don't need it, right? So that's one. But on the B2B like SaaS side, I think a lot of the things that I just said are just common sense that would make sense for a B2B SaaS company if they just really thought about it. Like, oh, we have the CTO podcast, the best one in Israel. And since we started it, we've gone from 0 to 2,000 CTOs listening. And those CTOs are sharing it on LinkedIn and talking about it and coming to our events and asking if they can be on our podcast. and they all these CTOs that are doing that are at our companies that we're targeting. And so, maybe we don't need a direct tie to revenue because this seems to be working. And oh, by the way, like our inbound volume has been growing too since we did it. Right. And so like there's some common sense things that I think people should just like consider outside of the tech. Like it's just all the data is there if you look for it. Like it's just not inside of your visible system or whatever you're using. Yeah. Other things that we look at for like leading indicators is based on the brand impact. You can look at organic and direct traffic to the homepage. You can look at organic and direct traffic sourced onto the demo page. So it funnels through a homepage, aka it's most likely a branded search, and then it moves into a demo. So you can start to quantify that against brand. That one's tough with like the Google SSL walks and some of the other, depending on your brand name, it can be hard to measure. And so I don't love that approach completely. I think the qualitative metrics are honestly just more accurate. And then we look at pipeline growth. Mm-hmm. Inbound pipeline growth is the metric once you have enough time to let it play. And again, like for us, we saw the inbound pipeline growth after 3 months of starting the podcast. It was there, mm-hmm. right? And we were a small company at that time. You know what I mean? I think we had 6 employees when we did it, and so but you could see it. And so, but for a SaaS company that doesn't resource the project appropriately, doesn't understand how to do it, doesn't do things, it might take you a year. You might never get there, mm-hmm. right? And so I think there's a partial amount of like, maybe you need, if you're going to try and do this, like LinkedIn, podcast, YouTube, community, events, like strategy, maybe you need some different talent. Yeah. Maybe you need a different person inside of your company to run these things than the person you have right now. And what companies will do is say, let's start a podcast, Susie, the marketing manager, is the least busy. Let's give it to her. As opposed to like, this is a critical part of our business. We don't have the talent in here in order to do it. Let's go source that talent.
Yeah. Yes. So naturally, you're a big believer in podcasting, and it really changed things for you. So how do you recommend, for SaaS B2B companies to go about it? When is the right time to start? How to start? What are the best practices, if any, for podcasting?
Who should host it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
it's not easy. Well, I think it's easier than what people perceive it to be. But, on the technical front, keeping a podcast sort of lively, we all know is not that easy.
Yep. So in a venture-funded SaaS company, what I recommend for a marketing team is before you ever consider starting a podcast or doing things that are difficult to measure further up in the funnel, different things like that, is you got to be hitting your goals first. And your goals should not be MQLs. It should be something later funnel. I prefer SQOs in the short and revenue in the long term, but you define your goals of whatever it is. It's not necessarily about how you measure the goals. It's that you're going to start a podcast and you're not hitting your plan, and your podcast is going to come under scrutiny when you don't hit the plan. That's going to be the first thing that gets cut because it's hard to measure. Mm-hmm. So you must either clear the space with an executive, or just hit your goals. So you're not going to get pressure on those types of things first, which is what we do with companies. It takes probably 6 months to get a paid engine and other, operational things working before you would consider starting a podcast, because if you don't, you're going to set the podcast up to fail after 4 episodes. So that's kind of like, I think, when to start, or you just believe in it completely and you just go whenever your organization believes in it completely and you just go. It's the preferred method, but both can work. Now, there's a lot of different reasons to have a podcast. I think companies have a lot of different ways. I think the way that we do it is actually a little bit unique. I think most companies would normally have somebody, and then they would just interview people that are most likely like their target buyer. It's typically what they'll do. Sometimes it's part of an ABM strategy where they'll do cold outbound afterwards, which people are starting to catch on to, and they don't like it. It's happened to me before. I do not like that when you invite me on your podcast and then come in with a sales pitch 7 days later from somebody else. Like, that is a losing strategy for people that are trying it.
Sell him now.
So don't, just be thoughtful about that. People can see right through it, and it comes off as very disingenuous. Just be thoughtful about that. But companies think about interviewing other people, which is great. You get your buyers, you get market research, you do networking. More people know about you. There's a lot of benefits to doing that. The challenge is that you don't actually communicate your point of view. You're just collecting the point of view of other people in the market. And then there's another one where you are hosting the show. And I believe that the right approach for that is that you have a subject matter expert inside of your company, your CEO, or a subject matter expert that matches the job credentials of your buyer that can drive your narrative into the market. And in an ideal fashion for a large, let's say Series D or further company, you actually have both running at the same time, two separate streams, right? And so you can have a marketing director or somebody like that that's going out talking to interviewing customers and prospects and different people like that, collecting insights, feeding that back into your strategy. And then you can have somebody that's driving your narrative into the market about where you feel that this function or this industry or this thing is going. And so that's the recommendation from a strategy standpoint. If you had to pick one, I just honestly think that the narrative component is better. I think that it works better. We're doing it right now. It's more challenging to execute. You saw the two different things. You need a marketing director that just interviews people, or you need somebody that people trust, that your buyers trust, that is credible, that can drive your narrative, that has a point of view, different things like that. It's harder. So that's sort of like the two separate ways. When I say about sourcing talent, if you're going to go the narrative route, it's your CEO or you have that person in your company. They just don't think they're the host of the podcast right now. And so if they don't want to be the host, then you need to go and find somebody else. If you saw the CFOs and your CFO doesn't want to be the host of the podcast, you want to go the narrative route and your CEO isn't going to do it, you need to go find a new CFO that can do that. That's my opinion. And I think that would be a worthwhile investment. For a company that's at this appropriate stage. When you get to the operational component, I'm not going to talk about tech and recording and post-production and different stuff like that. But I think the things that you need to have are a deep level of commitment from the person that's hosting the show. So that's one.
Yeah. State of the image and, gets an A+ for consistency.
Yeah.
I think,
I believe in it a lot. I believe in volume and consistency. And just to be clear for people, just because we publish 3 episodes a week doesn't mean the episodes are lower quality than if we did 1 a week or 1 a month. We keep the quality consistent. We try and I believe that we've increased the quality as we've increased the volume because you learn faster and we're committed to it. And so on a podcast, I do believe that frequency of posting, volume, commitment are all prerequisites to being successful. And then the next thing that I would point for people is that if you just have your podcast and you create a blog post about the podcast episode and you put it on Apple and Spotify, the odds of a lot of people finding it are very low. You need to have a user acquisition model to get people into the podcast, especially at the beginning. After that, word of mouth will fuel it. If it's really good, people will tell other people about it over time. But at the beginning, you got to find a way, depending on how big your podcast TAM is, to get 50, 500, 5,000 people, depending on your TAM, into that thing, which is going to be most likely driven through organic social distribution.
Yeah, it's a valid point. Distribution is part of everything. Even, the best content needs the initial push. So,
yeah, I think just to go in a little bit of a tangent here, I think that most SaaS companies right now, I interact with 30 of them currently. I think that they spend 99% of their time on content creation and 1% of time on distribution. So they create a lot of content that nobody sees. And so when I look at this, especially if you're in a more like an enterprise deal, like you got to be, almost all deals, it's 50-50 in my view. Like the content creation is as important as the distribution, because without the distribution, not to impression, to consumption, right? And so people also are not thoughtful about the idea of what does content consumption mean as opposed to distribution. And then following consumption is impacts. You have content creation, content distribution, which leads to content consumption. And then did the content make an impact? Following consumption is what I look for. And the qualitative, if you look at it in that stream, the qualitative indicators actually tell you about impact.
What are the right, you're talking also a lot about the right channels and the difference between channels for creating demand to channels to harvest demand and intent. So what do you think are the right channels for this and for that?
Yeah. So first off, for almost every B2B SaaS company, they're all doing the same stuff, right? They're all using the same channels. They're all doing the same things. It is not about the channel. It is about how you use it.
Yeah.
That matters. That's how you get differentiated. That's how when they asked me about the brand, I said Gong versus a different brand. They use the channels differently than how everyone else is doing it, right? And so it's how you use it. When you break down the content into sort of like capturing versus creating, I just look at it with a empathy for the level of buying intent that somebody has when they're on that channel to buy my thing, not to buy anything, right? And so when somebody's in Google searching for HR tech tool to do this
they want to buy
thing, that's an intent channel. I'm going to try and capture someone and convert them. They have clear intent to buy there. If they're on G2 or Capterra looking around at sales engagement platforms, and you are a sales engagement platform, you might want to be there and try and convert that person because they're clearly in buy mode. And there's plenty of different permutations of that system, but just having an empathy. Is someone looking to buy exactly what you sell or not? And when they're not looking to buy exactly what you sell, I call them awareness channels, where it would be much more appropriate to educate someone, to create affinity, to create content that they like, that they want to consume. And so I think a lot of the channels that have emerged over the past 10 years, which command B2B buying attention right now, LinkedIn, podcast, YouTube, potentially, Facebook and Instagram, whether or not you think that people use it for business purposes, they use it and they're on one of those channels a lot. And then it's your job to figure out how to tell a business story in a personal platform based on how they're using it. And so I think people spend a lot of B2B buyers consume information there. And then it's our job to figure out how to get them the information in a way that they like inside of that channel, not the other way around. A lot of companies just think, oh, it's LinkedIn, our B2B buyers are here. Let's just figure out how to convert them into leads. And you can do that if you want. I audit plenty of companies that run LinkedIn ebook downloads and get a shit ton of leads.
That don't go anywhere.
And if you looked at your data, like I'd like to give like a clear estimate on this. It's at least 20 B2B SaaS companies that are spending more than $25,000 a month on LinkedIn, at least that amount. It doesn't work. Like 0 companies are. If it was that easy to grow your company, then there would have a lot more unicorns out here, and we probably wouldn't need a company. And you might not need to be the CMO of that company because it would be like a cash ATM machine, and it's just not that easy.
Tell me, how do you see the sort of the healthy mix in your eyes between awareness channels and demand channels in terms of focus, in terms of sort of spend?
Yes, spend.
So intent channels are pretty locked in, right? Like there's a steady flow of people that are searching for HR onboarding tool every month.
Yeah.
It might go up and down, but that search volume is pretty consistent. And so in the intent channels, you can pretty much just cover what is available. I think that's smart. And then over time, you should optimize because not everything you covered initially is going to have positive ROI. And so you actually start taking a couple things out, putting a couple of things in. It's more like tinkering on the capture demand side. But if you know how to do it, it's actually like I call it table stakes at this point. It's very straightforward. People are searching for what you do. Where do you put the ads? What channels are they on? Blah, blah, blah. I think affiliates falls into that too. Some of our customers have a ton of success with like company like Software Advice or stuff like that. Affiliates falls in there too. Or lead aggregators, whatever you want to call them. And then on the create demand side, I break it into paid and organic. I think companies have been trained to think that you just do things with more money. Like, we'll just spend $100,000 a month there and that'll be fine. But it's actually strategy and talent that dictates success at the macro level on these channels. And so if you're in organic, it's pure strategy and talent. And if you're in paid, the strategy matters a lot more, probably a little bit less on the talent side. But when you break those two down in awareness channels, it's just whether or not you're paying for distribution.
Right.
Get it?
Yeah.
And so like paid, you can show up in the LinkedIn feed in two ways. You can pay 8 cents to show up in the feed, or you can post organically and hope that the CIO at Amazon is going to see your post because that's who you're targeting. And so I use both in very different ways, right? Like in paid, you guarantee delivery of content to the exact people that you want to target. Yeah. In organic, you don't get that. And so when you look at the paid side, you could quantify it based on your addressable market or your narrow market of how many people fall into that at the job companies that you're going after, and then multiply that by how many impressions or different things like that can I deliver before hitting some point of fatigue or saturation where I'm giving somebody too many ads and it actually pisses them off. And so you can try and figure out what that is, but you should be able to estimate that across the channels that you're working. I recommend doing one channel at a time to make sure that you're not just like, so that you have at least have one that's working. And then on the organic side, you got to build. But on the organic side, your costs are not in distribution; they're in content creation and talent.
Yeah,
right.
And so, sort of a different way of looking at it. Would be happy to answer a follow up on this one because I don't talk about it very often, but I think it's really interesting.
Is it the right mix, or is it depending on the stage of the company between paid and organic?
I don't think that it's dependent on the stage. I think it's more dependent on the current business performance and the growth ambitions of the company and their customer acquisition cost targets. A lot of the companies that we work with are more, and a lot of the companies just in general in this community are more focused on top line than CAC payback period. If you had to pick one, I think most CEOs would focus on top line. And so in those cases, like, would you rather get way more customers by paying for some ads, and then you get, you have a 7-month advertising CAC payback period instead of a 2-month advertising CAC payback period? A lot of companies would rather do that. Because if you looked, you would see that the sales and efficiencies on the other side, you get 7-month advertising CAC payback, your blended CAC as a company goes down because you get more customers in an efficient way through marketing. And so I don't think that there's a prescriptive way to think about it. I don't think that there is. What we do with companies is we look at baseline data, outbound cost per SQO, outbound customer acquisition costs, historical marketing cost per SQO, customer acquisition cost per lead, win rates, different stuff like that. We set targets based using historical win rates of what the allowable customer acquisition cost target that we have, which is usually dramatically lower than what's happening right now. Mm-hmm. And we get there typically through increasing the volume while maintaining or lowering the spend in order to get to that overall efficiency. And then once you're at the efficiency of the company, it's like, okay, we're selling a 50K ACV SaaS tool. We're paying $2,000 for a qualified opportunity through marketing, and we're going to win those at 27%. Like, let's go. You know what I mean? Like, a lot of companies, if they had those metrics, they would say, let's pour it on. Mm-hmm. But you can't just 5x your budget and get the same thing out. You're going to degrade it dramatically. And so figuring out how to make those steps in a logical way by centering on unit economics, by centering on cost per SQO as you scale, is the way that we figured out how to do it. So you don't make massive jumps in budget typically, because that would throw your system out of whack. But that's the best way that we figured out how to look at it, because SQOs, on a 90+ day sales cycle, you're typically going to hit SQO stage within the first 30 days. So it's a good leading metric to revenue, and you have a set, like a pretty set win rate for companies at SQO plus by lead source, and that's the way that we project it out.
Okay. I'm curious, do you have any benchmark, because, we're talking about paid social, for using it for distribution of content that you create, which obviously fuels into, the organic stuff. But,
Mm-hmm.
There's clear correlation between, how much effort and budget goes into distributing that content and the organic/direct leads and, SQLs that you get. That are essentially a different channel, but we know that there's a correlation. So I'm just
Mm-hmm.
curious, do you have, from what you're seeing, any benchmark to, how the two sort of work together?
So for those, what we do is that we set up custom conversions inside of Facebook and LinkedIn that say, fire this pixel when somebody hits our demo thank you page form, or whatever high intent form that you have. It could be pricing, it could be, normally it's pricing or demo for the companies that we work with. And then the pixel will fire, and then LinkedIn and Facebook can go back and say, did somebody that has the same browser that it just fired see or click on one of these ads and then connect it back? You're not going to be able to say who it is because LinkedIn and Facebook have privacy policies and they're not going to give you away that data. But I can see we're going after CIOs at companies 200 to 2,000 employees, and we're not using bad targeting, and we're not using expansion, we're not using all the other garbage that LinkedIn turns on by default. And so we know that one of the people in here was that person. And oh, by the way, over here, we're not getting bad demos on our demo form. So I assume that this data is clean. And that's the way that we start to correlate it. We're actually working on methods to make this even more accurate. But that's where we go right now. And anyone can go in and do that. And then you have to look at then the next thing we do is we look at what is our demo conversion rate for organic and paid, like non-direct response LinkedIn ad to a demo form, like for real demos is what I would call them. Like, what's our win rate on that? For a SaaS company, really depends on the quality of your lead, the quality of your sales process, how your product fits into the category of your competitive set. Like, there's a lot of factors, but demo form, you should be, I think, on 3% on the low end and significant, maybe higher than 15 on the high end, somewhere in that, depending on a lot of different factors. And so you have a range. We typically center on somewhere between 7 and 10 is what we see. And then you can back calculate, okay, so we had this person on a LinkedIn ad that saw one of these ads, and then they came over here and they converted on our demo. And, out of that, 1 out of 10 are going to buy our $50,000 software product. And so you can rebuild your demand gen model based on that. And when your conversion rates for for leads, raw leads to customers, 10% instead of 0.2%, you can pay a lot more for a lead. You can do a lot more strategic work. And so that's one of the places where we help people, because I'm for 50K ACV SaaS, I'm pumped to get a $500 lead because I know that they're going to win at 7 to 10%. And the advertising CAC on that is really strong for a lot of the companies that we work with. And so that's the way that I look at it in terms of the measurement in platform ads, and then how I think about like funnel and cost per lead. Because the conversion rates matter a lot in your projections of what cost per lead should be. And I think companies need to rethink that, because they've been collecting $50 shitty leads for a very long time, and it might make sense to try something different.
People usually get stuck at the cost per lead, or even a bit further down the funnel, but not looking at the overall picture. So it could get tricky.
Yeah, and on the qualitative side, you collect enough $50 leads and you pass them to your sales team, they'll tell you. Like, it's not complicated. Like, I get that they work at a company that fits, but they have zero buying intent, and your sales team doesn't want to talk to someone that has no buying intent.
Right, Chris, any famous last words? Maybe your number one advice to CMOs? The one thing.
For CMOs, the thing that I'm looking at most right now is the idea that especially if you're at a larger organization, let's say more than 200 employees, the idea of thinking about building a separate team on inside of your marketing team that is free of all of the marketing metrics and attribution and everything like that, in order to allow somebody on your team to do the things that we just talked about that work a lot better than a lot of things that are happening inside of your company right now. And so it might be a good idea. You could get a subject matter expert, one creative person, and one sort of like operational marketing manager director. You could have a 3-person team inside of your 500-person company. And I don't know, your marketing is probably 30 at that size. So you have 3 out of your 30 resources focused on this, where they don't have to answer to lead targets. They don't have to answer to attribution. They don't have to answer to all these things. All they have to do is produce content that your customers and buyers and market loves. And they get measured on how many people enjoy it, how many people share it, how many people say great things about you. And I think some people should consider it, because I don't see a lot of other ways that it's going to happen inside of companies and doing something like that, because of the things that what we talked about. And so if I was a CMO of a 500 person company, that's what I would do. If I was actually, I probably wouldn't work at that company if that was the situation, but,
kind of a
that's what I would do.
creative commando. I love it.
Yeah. It's just like it's a brand marketing arm that executes brand in quotes in ways that actually work today.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
Yeah. Look, Chris, that's been great. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris.
If someone wants to get in touch with you, follow you on LinkedIn, I guess, is the best way.
Yeah, following me on LinkedIn, we post videos every day, some provocative stuff, some helpful stuff. Might challenge you to think, so feel free to check it out and drop a comment whether or not you like it. And then
give me some qualitative love.
I want the qualitative. Come on, people. And then the State of Demand Gen podcast has been rapidly taking off. I get so many messages from people. Literally CMO came into my DM yesterday. I talked to her a year ago, and she would not get off the ebook strategy. She was fighting me on the ebooks. 12 months later, run ungated paid social, driving way better results. She told me that their pipeline increased by 30% last month by kept going across the strategy. And so just seeing a lot of people take the information and have success. And so if you're interested, that podcast is free and available on Apple and Spotify. It's called State of Demand Gen.
Good stuff. Go listen and watch it. It's great.
Thank you so much, Chris.
Thanks, Chris.
Awesome. This has been a blast. Thank you both.
Cheers.